As part of the DARGchive series, we're here at the 51st British Association of Applied Linguistics Conference at York St John, and I'm interviewing Ian. Thank you very much for agreeing to be part of the DARGchive series.
My pleasure.
Just the first question. How did everything begin, when did you first get interested in conversation analysis?
Well, I was in the doctoral program, and I was just finished with the kind of general readings of things, and I had already some data as being a teacher in Japan, but I had no idea how to analyze it. So I needed a method, and for many years in self-development, the recommendation is look for patterns or tendencies, but there's no more help than that. So I thought I need an analytical skill. And then the first book I read was by David Silverman, the book on Harvey Stacks. And that got me interested because it introduced some basic ideas and the kind of things he was interested in. And so after that, I spent a couple of years trying to read as much as I could.
So when you were getting interested in CA, what was your academic trajectory like before that, after that, and around CA? Where did you start, and how have you ended up at Okayama?
Yeah, well, at that point, when I started the linguistics program, actually I was a little bit naive because my master's is in TESOL. And I didn't really think about the difference of an applied linguistics program or TESOL one. So I was doing things very vaguely, superficially. In my TESOL work, I would have videos, but I would just look at gestures, like counting them, or I would look at how many words I would say compared to students. So it's a very superficial look, and then by learning more and more about CA, it gave me a way to enter the data. And I think that's the important point. Can you find an entry point? And since then, I keep on looking for not new entry points, but ones that I haven't particularly noticed before, especially ones that my fellow teachers, language teachers, would understand. Because in Japan, most people who are doing CA, they're not teaching CA in universities, they're actually English language teachers. So it's like a separate study, but I'm trying to make it as much a practical application, and I'm trying to argue throughout my career and even to this day that CA informs my teaching, but it's still a relatively small group of people who buy into that.
So with coming into CA and TESOL and things like that, this wasn't solely in Japan, it was in other places as well. Could you talk about your experiences being a researcher and an academic in different countries and in different environments and things, and what were your experiences of living in these places that may have completely different systems?
Well, to back up a little bit, before I went to Japan, I was a teaching assistant in a community college in Honolulu. And that was my first exposure where I would teach a class of about 20 students, and everyone from a different country. So then I noticed the importance of the teacher has to somehow address the needs of all these students. And then to go forward, I came to the UK to continue my studies at Lancaster. And when I went to Lancaster, it was because they had a strong TESOL department. And I was going to go that way, but then soon the people I went to work with retired. So then I started to go into, I had a choice of qualitative methods or quantitative methods. So I went to qualitative methods because it was closer to the way I was doing it. And then I was lucky because my supervisor said, let's do this together. I know some things and I've gone to other departments and talked to CA specialists. So trust me on how to academically write it up, but it's open for negotiation how we look at data. So then every week I'd bring a piece of data and we'd have like a mini data session. And from that we started to build a community in the UK, like at Newcastle and York, and whenever we would visit each other we would always make sure there's a data session at the center of our visit. And then when I went back to Japan, people have gone to other places, especially University of Hawaii, because they especially stayed with Gabriella Casper there. So it's interesting, we'd have a different strand there, and then we'd go to South Korea, and many people studied at UCLA, especially with John Heritage. So we're getting some nice strands, and then it's really nice how in Loughborough, it's been a center where many people gather and there's familiar names there. But yet at Newcastle there's familiar names there. And York St. John, there's people. So it's really nice how there's these threads, and the main challenge now is to sustain it.
So at the conference we're at, you're giving a talk entitled "Taking Risks in Opening Up the Conversation, the Contribution of Student-Initiated Inquiry to the Progressivity of Teacher-Student Interaction."
Right.
Would you be able to share some of the key ideas with us? Any sort of do's or do nots or anything like that?
Yeah. Actually, the title is long because I wanted to make kind of a capsule summary of what I'm interested in. So taking risk, of course, is addressing the conference theme, but I think it is taking risk whenever you make learning opportunities or conversational opportunities for the student to initiate some kind of inquiry. And then I think, at least I know in Japan, regardless of what type of English they're studying, the main thing they want to do is to be able to carry on the conversation or discussion. Doesn't matter if they're studying reading, writing, like that. So then the progressivity is important. How can we continue the talk, develop the talk, and looking at teacher-student as a social interaction, not as separate, distinct things that the teacher does this, the student does this, but rather as co-participants. So I think the main thing is not to separate it, that this is what a teacher does, this is what a student does. So at least momentarily, they're co-participants. And we try to, of course we always have the expert novice roles available, but not necessarily the whole time. There can be moments that they are more co-participants, and that's what I'm interested in looking at.
And within this talk, I noticed the 4 basic conversational challenges. Would you be able to speak around those and what those challenges are?
Right. So through my experience at other conferences, some that are more TESOL based, it's common to leave the audience with something they can take back to Monday morning's classes. So basically the 4 challenges are linked to the 4 turns I'm looking at, where the student initiates and then the teacher responds to the question. The student has a follow-up question, and then the teacher at this particular junction can decide what to do. So out of the 4 challenges to keep this orderly turn-taking sequential organization going is the first one. Can teachers somehow build into the lesson time or after class or before class opportunities for the student to ask the question. So that's, without that, the rest of it can't go forward.
So you mentioned when you were giving talks at TESOL conferences
Yeah.
and then wanting them to have a take-home message for Monday morning meetings.
Right.
Would you be able to talk a little bit about applying CA for this reflective practice and your interest in action research and continuous professional development more broadly?
Yes, okay. So for reflective practice, generally they say look at yourself, but of course we need some kind of records, and often that's writing journals. But the journals are usually based on recollection or recalling what happened. So I thought, why not also have a recording and a transcript, and it can be used as a type of journal. And then action research, and it's part of my presentation today, saying the teacher took a particular action, but what other actions could he have taken? So kind of like expand the repertoire of how you would respond in these situations. And then for continuous professional development, to make a habit, and it's easier if you have a community, you know, occasionally just record a bit of talk, transcribe it, and have, it doesn't have to be a formal data session, but even a half a page of transcripts, a couple of minutes. It doesn't, so I try to keep it very simple, the transcription and the recording, because I don't want to turn off other people from doing it, because transcription kind of has a bad reputation among many people who had a required course in master's programs. And they said, well, I'll never do that again. So I want to try to make it accessible and then show the tremendous value of even having short transcripts.
So moving away from teaching for a moment, we're curious about any other types of projects or interests that you have within or outside of conversation analysis.
Yeah, most of them are at least indirectly tied to conversation analysis, but I was doing some work in celebrity interviews. And one reason, well, besides it being very accessible on YouTube and it's already in the public domain, is I had a conversation with Alan Firth a long time ago, and I would go do data sessions there, and occasionally I would bring a celebrity interview, and he said sometimes it's good to look at L1 talk to remind ourselves what we're trying to teach L2 students. If we only look at L2 talk, sometimes we forget, you know, where we're trying to go with it. So then I said, yeah, that's really refreshing to see how L1, the pace, the rhythm, the nuance of the exam.
Would you just be able to clarify L1 and L2 for people who might not be familiar?
I take a broad definition where at least one of the speakers is using the second or third language, and then the L1 speakers, native or near-native speakers of the language.
So finally, would you be able to talk about the CA communities you're a part of? So you've mentioned quite a lot of when you were in the UK and working them. So what about in sort of Japan, where you are now at Okayama?
Yeah.
And more broadly in the, is it CAN?
Yes, the CA network in Asia is the name we have. Unfortunately, at my university, I'm the only one. So geographically, from Okayama, I have to go to the Osaka, Kyoto, Kobe area, and there's a group there. And there's another group in Tokyo, so I guess in big cities you can do this. And there would be monthly data sessions. And then what we've been doing recently is every summer we'd have a retreat, a 3-day retreat, and we go to an old converted Japanese farmhouse. And we just stay in this big house for 3 days, and then someone would be responsible for bringing their data. Usually it's a doctoral student.
Mm-hmm.
And then we look at their data, and it's kind of in the older tradition where there'd be like 100 pages of transcripts, and then you try to build collections based on some phenomena. And so, we'd work half a day and half a day, we're cooking meals or taking a walk. So we're kind of living and breathing CA, but that's not the only thing we're doing.
So with the network there, is there a particular focus? So for instance, is it particularly focused on teacher-student type talk, or is it more broadly any kind of interactional data goes?
Yeah. So at the moment, it has seemed to be classroom based,
Mm-hmm.
but there's been a range of things. For example, in team teaching, the conversation between the ALT, the assistant language teacher, and the main Japanese teacher, how they plan a lesson. And then in the other case, straight on recording a class, an English class, where a native speaker is teaching it, and look for not only communicative but cultural
Mm-hmm.
type thing. So yeah, at the moment it's been going that way, but at the data sessions, there's like hairdressers, so multimodal, like you're getting a haircut, but the barber or the cutter is talking to you, but they're not looking at you face to face. Often it's through the mirror they're looking, and then often there's an assistant there, so there's kind of a triangle of orientations to work with. And there was one interesting one going to the Japanese American Museum in Los Angeles, and how the guide orients to the people, plus point out what's on the wall or on the screen. So we do occasionally get that, and so the multimodal aspect occasionally comes up, and it kind of enriches the things we look at.
And so if somebody's visiting and would like to join this, is there some point of contact that they can do?
Yes, in the first instance they could contact me, or one of our organizers is Tim Greer at Kobe University, and he is very active attending various CA conferences around the world, so they might even see his name on their program. But yeah, they could contact me, and I could, and they would be welcome to join us.
Thank you very much for the interview, and thanks for being part of the DARGchive.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Jack. Thanks for asking.